You've said it before, maybe quietly, maybe more often than you admit. If only I started earlier. A different time, a different decision, a different version of you. And every time that thought appears, it carries weight, the kind that makes the present feel smaller than it really is. Because when you look back, everything seems clearer. You see the missed chances, the delayed decisions, the moments where you could have acted but didn't. And from where you stand now, it feels like those moments mattered more than anything you can do today. At first, it's just reflection, but over time it becomes something else. A quiet belief that the opportunity has passed, that whatever could have been built needed to begin back then, not now. And without realizing it, you start holding yourself back. But here's what most people never question. You're comparing your current awareness to your past decisions. You're judging what you did then based on what you know now, and that comparison is never fair. You didn't have this perspective years ago. You didn't see what you can see now, and because of that, you couldn't act the way you think you should have. But your mind doesn't care about that. It only sees the gap, and that gap creates hesitation. It makes you question whether starting now is even worth it, whether there's enough time left to make a real difference, whether the effort will lead anywhere meaningful at all. That's where most people stop. Not because they can't move forward, but because they've convinced themselves that the timing is wrong, that they're late, that they've missed something that can't be recovered. And so they wait, hoping for a different feeling that never comes. But what if the idea of being too late is the very thing keeping you stuck? What if time has not been working against you, but simply waiting for you to see things clearly enough to act with intention? Because clarity changes everything. It removes distractions, sharpens focus, and eliminates what no longer matters. And when you have that clarity, you move differently. You don't waste energy the same way. You don't chase things that lead nowhere. You begin to act with purpose instead of uncertainty, and that alone changes the pace of your progress. There are people who started later than you and still built something significant. Not because they had more time, but because they used their time differently. They moved with urgency, not panic, with direction, not confusion. Because once you understand what matters, you stop hesitating, you stop overthinking, you stop waiting for perfect conditions. You begin to act even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's uncertain, even if it feels overdue. And that's where things begin to shift, not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. You start to feel momentum again. You begin to see small results, then larger ones, and over time, what once felt impossible starts to feel within reach. But none of that happens if you stay focused on what's behind you, because the past cannot be changed, but it can control you if you keep giving it attention. It can shape your decisions, limit your actions, and convince you that your future is already decided, and it's not. The only thing that matters now is what you choose to do from this point forward. Not what you didn't do, not what you missed, not what could have been, but what can still be built, because time is still moving. Every day, whether you act or not, it continues. And the difference between regret and progress is not how much time you've had, but what you do with the time you have now. Think about where you'll be 5 years from today, not in terms of age, but in terms of direction. Because if you continue the same pattern, the same hesitation, the same delay, the outcome will remain the same. But if you shift even slightly, your direction changes. And over time, that change compounds into something far greater than it seems in the moment. That's the part most people underestimate. They think starting now won't matter because it's not early enough. But they forget that consistency over time has a way of transforming even small beginnings into something powerful. So the question is not whether you should have started earlier. The question is whether you're going to let that thought stop you from starting now. Because this moment right here is the earliest point you have left, and what you do with it will determine everything that follows. What you're about to hear will challenge how you think about timing, regret, and possibility. It will shift your focus away from what's gone and toward what remains, which is far more valuable than you realize. And if you stay with it, you may begin to see something clearly, that the opportunity was never in the past. It's been waiting for you in the present all along. There is a peculiar habit of the human mind which, if left unexamined, becomes the silent architect of limitation. It is the tendency to look backward, not for instruction, but for judgment. Many men sit in quiet reflection, not to gather strength from experience, but to measure themselves against what might have been, and in doing so, they unknowingly weaken their present position. This backward glance, when repeated often enough, begins to take on the appearance of truth. It whispers that the moment for action has passed, that the proper season belonged to another time, and that whatever remains is insufficient for meaningful achievement. Yet this is not truth, it is interpretation, shaped by a mind that has not yet learned to distinguish between reflection and self-imposed defeat. The greatest error in this habit lies in the manner of comparison. A man evaluates his past decisions with the knowledge he possesses today, forgetting entirely that such knowledge was not available to him then. He judges his former self by a standard that did not exist at the time, and from this unfair comparison, he draws the conclusion that he has failed in ways that could not have been avoided. In this process, what begins as simple recollection transforms into a fixed belief. The mind, having repeated the same conclusion often enough, accepts it without further examination. It declares that opportunity belonged to the past, and that the present is merely a continuation of missed chances. Thus, without any external force, a man begins to limit his own actions based upon a false understanding of time. Yet time itself has no such judgment. It does not withhold opportunity from those who began late, nor does it favor those who began early. Time is indifferent. It moves forward with equal pace for all men, offering itself fully to those who are prepared to use it, and passing silently by those who hesitate under the weight of their own conclusions. There are men who began early and accomplished little, for they moved without direction, guided by uncertainty rather than purpose. There are others who began much later, yet advanced with such clarity and intention that they surpassed those who had far more years at their disposal. The difference was not in the time they possessed, but in the manner in which they used it. Consider the individual who reaches a point in life where clarity has finally been attained. He sees, perhaps for the first time, what truly matters and what does not. The distractions that once consumed his attention lose their influence, and the unnecessary pursuits that once seemed important fall away. What remains is a sharpened sense of direction, and with it, a capacity for action that did not exist before. This clarity, though often mistaken as something that should have been achieved earlier, is in fact the result of accumulated experience. It is the product of years spent observing, deciding, correcting, and refining. Without those years, the clarity would not exist. Thus, what appears to be delay is, in many cases, preparation of the most valuable kind. The man who understands this truth no longer views his past as wasted. He recognizes that every experience, whether it produced immediate results or not, contributed to his present understanding. He ceases to measure his progress by when he began, and instead measures it by the certainty with which he now proceeds. Once this shift occurs, the weight of regret begins to dissolve. In its place arises a sense of urgency, not the urgency of panic, but the urgency of purpose. It is the recognition that while time continues to move, it may now be directed with intention. This understanding alters the pace of action, not by increasing effort alone, but by eliminating unnecessary movement. Many men labor intensely, yet achieve little, for their effort is scattered. They pursue many directions at once, changing course frequently, and in doing so, they expend energy without producing lasting results. The man who acts with clarity, however, directs his effort toward a definite aim. Each action builds upon the last, and progress becomes visible, not through sudden leaps, but through steady accumulation. To the outside observer, this progress may appear rapid, even surprising. It seems as though the individual has advanced in a short period of time far beyond what others have achieved over many years. Yet this appearance is misleading. What is seen as rapid advancement is, in truth, the result of focused application guided by understanding that was not previously present. Others begin to take notice of this change. They observe a difference, though they may not be able to explain it fully. Where once there was hesitation, there is now decisiveness. Where there was uncertainty, there is now direction. The individual appears more composed, more deliberate, and more certain of his course. This perception is not the result of outward display, but of inner alignment. Such a transformation does not occur instantly. It is the result of repeated decisions made in accordance with a clear purpose. Each decision reinforces the next, and over time, a new pattern of action is established. The individual no longer consults his past for permission to act. He draws instead upon his present understanding, using it as the foundation for forward movement. It is important to recognize that this process requires a deliberate refusal to dwell upon what cannot be altered. The past, once examined and understood, serves its purpose. To revisit it repeatedly in search of different conclusions is to engage in an exercise that produces no value. The mind must be trained to return to the present, where all action takes place. There is a certain discipline required in this training. The thoughts that arise uninvited, suggesting that one has begun too late, must be met with firm opposition. They must be replaced, not with empty encouragement, but with reasoned understanding. The individual must remind himself that he now possesses knowledge that was not available before, and that this knowledge changes the nature of his opportunity. He may affirm with quiet conviction, "I do not measure my life by when I began, but by the power with which I now proceed." This statement, when repeated with belief, begins to reshape the underlying assumptions of the mind. It replaces the notion of delay with the recognition of readiness. As this belief strengthens, hesitation diminishes. The individual no longer waits for a different feeling to justify action. He understands that action itself creates the feeling of momentum. By beginning, even in a small way, he sets in motion a series of events that gradually build upon one another. In time, what once seemed distant begins to come within reach. The gap between intention and result narrows, not because circumstances have changed dramatically, but because the individual has changed his approach. He acts with purpose, and through this purpose he begins to influence the conditions around him. It is at this stage that a profound realization emerges. The opportunity that once appeared to belong to the past is revealed to exist in the present. It was never absent, only unseen. The individual, having acquired the ability to recognize it, now stands in a position to act upon it with effectiveness. Thus, the question is no longer whether one should have begun earlier. That question, once examined, loses its significance. The only question that remains is whether one will act now with the understanding that has been earned through experience. For the man who answers this question with action, time becomes an ally rather than an adversary. Each day contributes to his progress, and each decision strengthens his direction. The years ahead, once viewed with uncertainty, become the very means through which his purpose is realized. And so it may be said with certainty that the illusion of lost time is nothing more than a misunderstanding of its nature. Time has not been working against you. It has been waiting for the moment when you would see clearly enough to act with intention. That moment is now. There exists a moment in every man's life, though often unnoticed, which determines the course of all that follows. It is not marked by outward ceremony, nor announced by any visible sign. It is the moment in which he ceases to consider many paths and chooses one. This act, simple in appearance, carries within it a force far greater than most men ever come to understand. The majority drift through years not because they lack ability, but because they fail to decide. They entertain possibilities without committing to any, and in doing so, they remain in a state of perpetual preparation. Their energy is divided, their attention scattered, and their progress delayed not by circumstance, but by hesitation. Indecision is not merely the absence of action. It is a condition of the mind which consumes time without producing results. It disguises itself as caution, as careful thinking, as the desire to choose correctly. Yet in truth, it is often nothing more than fear of consequence, expressed in the form of delay. A man who hesitates does not stand still. Though he may appear inactive, time continues its movement, and with it, opportunity passes by unnoticed. The years that seem to disappear are not lost to failure, but to uncertainty. They are consumed by the habit of postponement, which, once formed, becomes difficult to break. In contrast, the man who decides, even without perfect knowledge, begins at once to shape his circumstances. Decision creates direction, and direction organizes effort. The moment a definite choice is made, the mind aligns itself with that choice, and actions begin to follow in support of it. It is not necessary that the first decision be perfect. No man possesses complete knowledge at the outset. What matters is that the decision is made with firmness, and that it is held long enough to produce results. Through action, knowledge increases, and through knowledge, decisions become more refined. Many of the most successful individuals delayed their beginnings, yet when they decided, they advanced with a speed that seemed disproportionate to their starting point. This was not due to chance, but to the absence of hesitation. Once committed, they did not divide their attention among alternatives. They moved forward, correcting their course as needed, but never abandoning their direction. To the outside observer, such individuals appear certain, even when circumstances remain uncertain. This appearance is not the result of knowing all outcomes, but of having chosen a path and accepted the responsibility of following it. Their confidence is not in the absence of difficulty, but in their willingness to proceed despite it. Others begin to recognize this quality. They observe a steadiness that is uncommon, a refusal to be swayed by temporary conditions. Where most men pause to reconsider at the first sign of challenge, the decisive individual continues, adjusting his method but not his aim. This consistency creates an impression of strength, which attracts both respect and opportunity. The habit of decision strengthens with use. Each time a man decides promptly and acts upon that decision, he reinforces his ability to do so again. Conversely, each act of hesitation weakens this ability, making future decisions more difficult. Thus, decision is not a single act, but a pattern that either develops or deteriorates over time. There is a close relationship between decision and self-trust. A man who frequently changes his course begins to doubt his own judgment. He seeks external confirmation, postpones action, and becomes dependent upon the opinions of others. In this state, his progress is governed not by his own purpose, but by the shifting views of those around him. The decisive individual, however, develops confidence through action. He learns from his results, whether favorable or not, and uses that knowledge to improve. He does not expect perfection, but he does expect movement. Through repeated experience, he comes to trust his ability to navigate uncertainty, and this trust becomes a source of strength. It must be understood that decision carries with it a certain cost. To choose one path is to relinquish others. Many men avoid decision for this reason, believing that by keeping their options open, they preserve opportunity. In truth, they sacrifice progress. For opportunity requires action, and action requires direction. There comes a point at which a man must cease to negotiate with himself. He must stop weighing possibilities and begin to act upon one. This transition, though difficult, marks the beginning of true advancement. It is the moment in which thought is converted into movement and intention into result. The man who reaches this point often experiences a shift in perception. What once appeared uncertain becomes manageable. Challenges that seemed overwhelming are approached with method rather than fear. This change does not occur because the external world has altered, but because the internal state of the individual has become organized. Such organization produces efficiency. Effort is no longer wasted upon conflicting aims. Each action serves a purpose, and each purpose contributes to a larger objective. Time, which once seemed insufficient, begins to yield results, not because there is more of it, but because it is used with greater precision. Others observe this efficiency and respond to it. They see in the individual a quality of direction that inspires confidence. Opportunities which once seemed distant begin to appear, not because they were absent before, but because the individual is now prepared to recognize and act upon them. It is often said that successful men are fortunate. This statement, though common, is incomplete. What appears as fortune is frequently the result of readiness meeting opportunity. The decisive individual, having committed to a course, is able to act when the moment presents itself. The hesitant individual, still weighing options, allows the moment to pass. There is an affirmation which, when understood and applied, strengthens the habit of decision. I decide with firmness, and I stand by my decisions with persistence. This statement is not merely a declaration, but a principle to be practiced. It requires that a man trust his judgment long enough to give it effect. As this principle is applied, hesitation begins to lose its influence. The mind becomes accustomed to movement rather than delay. Decisions are made more readily, and actions follow more quickly. Progress, once slow and uncertain, gains momentum, and the individual begins to experience the results of his direction. It must be emphasized that decision does not eliminate difficulty. Obstacles remain, and challenges arise. The difference lies in the response. The decisive individual meets these conditions with action, while the hesitant individual meets them with reconsideration. One moves forward, the other remains where he is. Over time, this difference becomes significant. The distance between those who decide and those who hesitate grows steadily, until it becomes unmistakable. What began as a small variation in behavior develops into a wide separation in results. Thus, it may be said that decision is the dividing line between drift and direction. It is the force that transforms intention into reality and converts time into progress. Without it, effort is scattered and results are uncertain. With it, even limited time may be used to produce substantial achievement. The man who understands this truth no longer waits for certainty before acting. He recognizes that certainty is often the result of action, not its prerequisite. He decides, and through decision, he creates the conditions under which success becomes possible. And so, the question is not whether the time has passed, but whether the decision has been made. For until a man decides, time remains unused. But the moment he chooses and acts, time begins to work in his favor, and progress, once delayed, begins at once. Before any outward change may take place in the affairs of a man, there must first occur a reorganization within his own mind. This is a principle so simple that it is often overlooked, yet so powerful that no lasting achievement can occur without it. The outer world reflects the inner condition, and until the inner condition is brought under control, the outer will remain uncertain. The majority of men permit their thoughts to wander without direction, accepting whatever ideas enter the mind without examination. They do not recognize that each thought carries influence, shaping not only their present state but their future condition. In this manner, they become subject to their own thinking rather than masters of it. Thought, when left undisciplined, becomes a source of confusion. It shifts from one subject to another, influenced by circumstances, opinions, and passing impressions. Effort, guided by such thinking, lacks consistency. Actions are taken without clear purpose, and results, if they appear at all, are temporary and incomplete. In contrast, the man who learns to govern his thoughts acquires a form of control that extends beyond himself. He selects, with care, the ideas he permits to take root in his mind. He directs his attention toward that which supports his purpose and rejects that which weakens it. In doing so, he creates a foundation upon which consistent action may be built. This discipline does not arise from a single effort. It is the result of repeated practice, applied daily, until it becomes a habit. At first, the mind resists control, returning to familiar patterns of doubt, hesitation, and distraction. Yet with persistence, these patterns begin to weaken, replaced by new habits aligned with intention. There exists within every individual a division of thought. One part inclines toward progress, urging action, encouraging effort, and supporting growth. The other inclines toward retreat, suggesting delay, magnifying difficulty, and recalling past disappointment. The outcome of a man's life is determined by which of these tendencies he permits to dominate. The man who succeeds is not free from negative thought, but he has learned to recognize it without accepting it. He observes the suggestion of doubt and replaces it with direction. He does not allow the memory of past error to interfere with present action. Instead, he uses that memory as instruction, extracting from it only what may be applied constructively. This process of replacement is essential. It is not enough to resist undesirable thought. It must be displaced. The mind cannot remain empty. If one idea is removed, another must take its place. Therefore, the individual must deliberately introduce thoughts that support his aim, repeating them until they become natural. Repetition, though often misunderstood, is the means by which thought is strengthened. An idea, repeated with belief, gradually assumes authority within the mind. It begins as a suggestion, becomes a tendency, and ultimately forms a habit. Through this process, the direction of one's thinking is established. Consider the individual who has long entertained the belief that he has begun too late. This belief, repeated over time, has shaped his perception of opportunity. It has caused hesitation, limited action, and reinforced itself through lack of progress. To change this condition, the belief must be replaced with one that supports movement. He may begin by affirming, with conviction, "I govern my thoughts, and through them, I govern my destiny." This statement, when applied with understanding, serves as a counter to the previous belief. It shifts attention from what cannot be altered to what may be controlled, establishing a new direction for thought. As this affirmation is repeated, it must be accompanied by action. Thought alone, without expression, remains incomplete. Each time the individual acts in accordance with his new belief, he strengthens it. The mind, observing the connection between thought and result, becomes more willing to accept the new pattern. There is a gradual transformation that occurs in this process. The individual begins to notice that his reactions to circumstances are changing. Where he once responded with uncertainty, he now responds with deliberation. Where he once paused in doubt, he now proceeds with intention. This change is not imposed from without, but developed from within. Others, though they may not perceive the cause, begin to observe the effect. They notice a steadiness in his manner, a calmness in his decision, and a consistency in his actions. He appears less affected by temporary conditions, more focused upon his direction, and more certain of his purpose. This perception alters the way in which others respond to him. The disciplined thinker does not waste energy upon matters that do not contribute to his aim. He does not engage in unnecessary conflict, nor does he allow himself to be drawn into the confusion of others. His attention is reserved for that which advances his purpose, and his thoughts are aligned accordingly. It must be understood that this discipline requires vigilance. The mind, having been accustomed to wandering, will attempt to return to its former habits. Doubt may reappear, distraction may arise, and old patterns may attempt to reassert themselves. These occurrences are not signs of failure, but reminders of the necessity of continued practice. The individual must meet these moments with firmness. He must recognize that each instance of control strengthens his ability, while each lapse weakens it. Through continued effort, the new pattern becomes established, and the mind, once restless, becomes directed. There is a notable effect that accompanies this transformation. The individual begins to experience a sense of order, not only in thought but in action. Tasks are approached with method, decisions are made with clarity, and results become more consistent. This order reduces wasted effort and increases effectiveness. It is at this stage that progress begins to accelerate, not because the individual is working harder, but because he is working with greater precision. Each action contributes to a definite aim, and each result builds upon the last. Time, once consumed by scattered effort, is now used with purpose. The importance of repetition must again be emphasized. Many abandon this process too soon, expecting immediate change. They fail to recognize that habits formed over years cannot be replaced in a moment. Persistence in thought is required, just as persistence in action is required. The man who continues, however, begins to experience a shift in identity. He no longer sees himself as one who hesitates, but as one who acts. He no longer defines himself by past delay, but by present discipline. This change in self-perception influences his behavior, reinforcing the very habits he seeks to establish. Others respond to this change in a manner that further supports it. They begin to trust his judgment, to rely upon his consistency, and to recognize his direction. Opportunities, once overlooked, are now presented. Not because the world has changed, but because the individual has become prepared to receive them. Thus, it may be said that the discipline of thought is the foundation upon which all outward achievement is built. Without it, effort remains scattered and results uncertain. With it, even limited resources may be directed toward substantial accomplishment. The man who masters his thoughts acquires mastery over his actions. He ceases to be governed by circumstance and begins to influence it. He moves with intention, guided by a clear purpose and supported by a mind that has been trained to serve that purpose. And so, the reorganization of thought is not an abstract exercise, but a practical necessity. It is the means by which confusion is replaced with clarity, hesitation with action, and uncertainty with direction. Through it, the individual gains control